Thanks, everybody. I'm excited to be here, and I can't believe that I'm the first to, wish everybody a happy Star Wars Day. May the 4th be with you. I think it's really appropriate that we're going to do, a data analytics symposium on May the 4th. But there you go. I just want to put that out there. So first of all, who am I? I think Mike did a great job there. Thank you of introducing me. I have my bachelor's in applied math from Ohio University. I am a graduate of the University of Cincinnati, MS in Business Administration, and I'm sure I'm aging myself by calling it quantitative analytics or quantitative analysis instead of business analytics, but it's been a while. It was a great experience. As Mike said, I was the Vice President of Business Insights and Analytics at NetJets. Had a great career there, coming up through the ranks in the financial planning analysis, and then as well as working in the Business Insights and Analytics team. And now I'm the Senior Director of Engineering and Data Science at Schneider. My career here is a little bit different than before because I'm much more embedded into the IT system. So I'm working on data from that side as well, which is really exciting. As Mike mentioned, why should you listen to me and what do I have to kind of share with you? I helped build the Center of Excellence in Data Visualization. I had a great team. Part of the reason we built that was to drive a trusted source of data and information for the decision making. We also launched or kind of expanded, I would say, a data governance program as well. And I learned a lot in that process as well, the data governance side. So we'll kind of talk about a few of those different things here today. So kind of an introduction here. Have you ever shown up to a meeting and you've got a metric that you're going to share? It could be a trend, it could be a calculation, it could be anything. And someone else has brought the same metric and they contradict each other. I think we've all had this experience. And, this is the worst feeling because especially if you have any kind of management or executive management in the room that you're trying to persuade to a certain point of view. When you have conflicting metrics like this, you end up spiraling down the rabbit hole of where did you get your metrics? And well, did you count all the widgets or were you only looking at the yellow widgets? Or were you only looking in this geographic area? Or, well, when did you pull your data? Because maybe that's where our calculation is wrong. Or how do you define your data, right? What is your definition of a widget or what is your definition of a calculation? There's all different kinds of things here that you're going to look at is what are the filters, et cetera. And so this is a really horrible feeling to have. And, I'm guessing most people in industry have been in this situation at some point in time. Have you ever heard someone say that they either overwrite data or delete data? I'm guessing that people don't overwrite data. That's probably a little bit, outdated. We don't see that as much as we used to, but deleting data, I understand that you can't keep everything, although, the analyst inside me wishes that we could keep everything and that we could, because I'd like to say at some point in time, we're going to use it. Or honestly, I've seen at some point in time that someone asked for that information. But how do you decide what data you're going to delete, right? How do you decide what isn't valuable anymore? Who gets to decide what to delete and what's not valuable anymore? Are the analytics team or is the strategy or innovation team, are they at the table when those kinds of things are made? I understand that there are some reasons why we want to delete data, either legal reasons or regulatory reasons. There's a lot of that I understand. But outside of that, what are reasons that we're deleting or overwriting data? Is your data poorly defined or undefined? So this is probably one of the bigger areas that I see where people have a difference of opinion of what something means. You may have the same or similar data, and what's the distinction between the two? And why are you collecting both of those? What good is this data if you're not even sure why it's you're collecting it or what it's measuring. So these are kind of a few of the things where it's kind of like, I'm really undervaluing this data because I don't understand exactly what it is or why it is I'm collecting it. Are you missing out on collecting valuable data? I mean, I think all of us would go, yeah, probably. And it's, you know, it's probably for a couple different reasons. Free form, you know, is it because you have a difficult time explaining the value of the data to the company? Is it due to the cost of storage? You know, often unstructured data is like that, whether it's video or you know, something, you know, IoT from the internet, that's a lot of volume of data. And so maybe, you know, you're deciding what to collect and what not to collect, or, you know, maybe you just don't know the value of the data. So you're saying, until I understand that value, I'm not going to collect it. So maybe you're missing out on collecting valuable data that you'll need in the future. Do you have inconsistent structure in data fields, which makes analysis all but impossible? Often free-form text fields make it difficult to analyze the data, you know, so people will write the same word in different ways. Maybe someone will shorten it, maybe someone will capitalize it, maybe, you know, there are different ways of saying the same thing. So, you know, if you're going to have something where you want to do analysis on it, of course you can do natural language processing if you have that ability. But if it's really just kind of trying to capture something from a data field, the best way maybe is to, you know, limit the number of choices, like a drop down, or maybe make sure that it's structured in some way so that people are putting in the same information every time. So, you know, in inconsistent structure, it's very difficult. It takes a lot of time to create value from that data. And lastly, you know, how many have had an executive create their own graphs, charts, data, tried to pool their own data, etc.? Now, I'm not trying to say that executives, you know, aren't capable of creating their own charts or data. What I'm asking is, you know, depending upon the size of the company, you know, are they really the right people to be doing that? You know, are they close enough to the data to actually understand, you know, the intricacies of what's going on in that data? You know, is it the best use of their time too, right? I mean, you know, in my experience, I want my executives to look at the output of the data to make decisions, to talk about strategic initiatives. I don't want them necessarily spending their time to create their own graphs, maybe their own data trends, etc. And then oftentimes, you know, once something like that is created, you have to kind of maybe go back and even reconcile to it and find out how they did it, what they were looking at, etc. And again, it's just taking up more time. So, you know, this is kind of the way I feel about data a little bit. You know, if there's a vacuum of information, someone's going to try and fill it. And who that is and how they do it is often the source of a lot of inconsistencies in the way we capture data and the way that we value data. And to be honest with you, if we all agree that we should be a data run industry, data run society, data run company, then we need to make sure that we're valuing the data we have similarly to the way we value our other assets. Okay, you know, it's really hard to do this, you know, virtually, because I'm hoping that all of you are maybe chuckling, you know, in your dining rooms or, you know, wherever you are at the moment watching this. But I don't think you can have any good presentation without a good Dilbert. And Dilbert has a cartoon for just about everything. You know, I think this is, you know, a great conversation. I'm hoping most of you, you know, don't necessarily recognize the first part, you know, decisions based on flawed logic anyway. But I think there is this idea of, you know, what am I deleting? And, you know, can we say that what we're deleting is good or bad? But so I appreciate a good Dilbert, and they've got something for every experience. So why is data an asset? And so, you know, I'm kind of basing that this talk on that concept, and you all might be saying, yeah, I think data is an asset, but how do I prove that? And what does that mean? Like, what am I going to do differently if I do say that data is an asset. So let's talk about why it's an asset. You know, I think we can all agree that data is a useful or valuable thing, and it's owned by a company regarded as having value. Now, I'm not suggesting that there aren't good times that data should be available, you know, as an open source, or you know, that we shouldn't share certain data. But I think that there's data that's very useful and valuable to the company that needs to be protected. And so that's kind of the data that I'm specifically talking about. So how do you know if your data is an asset? Well, what's the value to you? So as you think about the data that you have, what value is it to you? Do you make decisions based upon it? Do you use the data to provide insights? Is it being used for automation? You know, so I know it's difficult to say, I want to put a financial number or a value, like a financial value to the data, but there's always something that you can measure to say, if I didn't have this data, what does that lack of information do to the way you make decisions in your company? So that's one way to kind of think about how you value your data. And if you're not sure, ask yourself, what's the value of my data to my competitor? What would they do with this information if they knew it? How would they use it? You know, what if they knew that I was selling widgets by geography in certain regions? Would they want that information? Would they want my customer information? We all know that that's really important information that we know about our customers, right? So think about it. If someone says it's not valuable, so we're going to delete it, or it's not valuable, so we're not going to make sure that we keep it as high quality, say, well, what would our competitor use this data for, and what would be the value to them? So one of the things I think about too is, again, kind of using this information in my company. What is it worth to me to know, you know, a demand forecast, right? I'm guessing almost everybody in some way is using a demand forecast or a capacity forecast, or, you know, something that's showing the flow through your industry and your company, right? So what is it worth to know the future is basically what I'm asking, or at least some forecast of that future. What is that value to you in your business? What is it to you to know financial trends? Maybe you're doing something in the market, you're either purchasing or you're selling. So, you know, to know or to expect what the next financial trend is going to do. Now, obviously it's not perfect, or we'd all be working on Wall Street, or we'd be retired from Wall Street in our mansions, but to at least know what our market is doing, or what our financial trends are doing, or the things that I purchase, whether it's a commodity or something like that. What's the value of that? And think about how that's one way to value your data. Operational metrics and KPIs. So I was giving this talk the other day, and I said KPIs, and I understand that we probably have some students out there as well as others that may not know. KPI means key performance indicator. Now, when someone asked me that, I use KPI so often that I had to actually think, and someone had to help me with what KPI stands for. But basically what I'm talking about here are operational metrics within the company that we track. It could be on a performance basis, right? How many, I keep using the term widgets because it's the easiest thing to talk about, but you know, how many widgets is a person making, or how many do we make on a day, or how many do we sell on a day? What's our inventory, and how do we track our inventory, right? What's the definition of all of these things? So understand there's going to be 100 different operational metrics that you're probably tracking on any given time, whether it's on a daily, monthly, hourly, you know, minute basis of, you know, how many am I making, how many am I selling, how many customers visited my store, etc. And then lastly, customer information. I think this one in particular is becoming more and more important. In the past, we may not have had the ability to get very specific customer information, but nowadays, I think, you know, we're seeing with whether you have like a Kroger card or something like that, where it tracks your information, or online, where you actually go in and you're doing searches and you're buying things on, say, Amazon or another store, or even just going to a website and looking around. people are capturing that information. And I'll talk a little bit later about maybe some of the impacts we're seeing in the, call it the regulatory environment, that are impacting that. But I think customer information is becoming more and more important to us because we can start to do our marketing based on that. We can start to do our pricing. We can even just look at where should we target certain aspects of our company's products to who and who's buying them, that type of thing. So we'll see that even more going forward. So I talked a little bit about maybe, how you can think of data as an asset. So the other part of this conversation is about the information flow. So I think you get the idea that data is really important because we're all using it to make decisions, either forward ones or automated ones, or just looking at, again, the trending of financials in general. So I cannot tell you how many times I've seen either, in my experience or talking to others about the confusion over different data sources. This doesn't necessarily mean that either data source is wrong, but because they kind of conflict because of, again, the way it's filtered, the way that it's defined, maybe people have different definitions for the same word, right? Or the same term that they're using. There's a lot of confusion then about which data source should I be using to calculate or to look at to make decisions. I've heard people say that they have multiple sources of the truth. Now we all know that that's not that's not true. You can't have multiple sources of the truth. You may have multiple sources of similar data that may be showing similar things or be describing similar things. But the fact is that they are different, and it's not always easy to figure out how those things are different. So this is a very common thing that I hear about. And again, most of the time it deals with, how you're pulling the data, what it looks like, when am I pulling it? One of the reasons that we kind of built the Center of Excellence in Visual Analytics was to not necessarily get rid of this confusion, because I don't think you're always going to have different data sources, and people are going to have, it could be even like different areas of the company, right? Sales might be pulling a certain number and operations is pulling something else. But to be able to have one location that people know they can go to get that defined high quality, someone has looked at it, they know that someone has curated the data, etc. So we'll kind of talk a little bit about that here in just a minute. But so this is why, if you have confusion over different data sources, how do you make decisions, right? How do you know which is the right, or which is the right one for the situation that you're looking at? So I talked a little bit about unclear data definitions. This is probably the second one that I see. Kind of the idea is that, how do you define a calculation, or how is your data defined? Sometimes there are multiple fields in a data source that will look very similar, and maybe even for certain entries it has the same input, but sometimes it doesn't. And how do you know, maybe which date you should be using, or which time you should be using, or who did what? And so not having clear data definitions for each of these things is a huge source of problem in this information flow, because you now have to take time to understand the difference between each one of these. So when someone doesn't have something very formal written down, and oftentimes you're going to see this a little bit, I'm going to talk about data governance, but that's part of it. But it's really not that hard in either a small corporation or small company, or even a small analytics group, to take the time and everybody come to a consensus about what does this calculation mean to me? What am I dividing? What data am I pulling, and where am I pulling it from? And this is going to be kind of the universal definition that we're going to use every time we talk about this every month going forward. And that's the type of thing that you need from an information flow, because then at least you have consistency of what that definition means. Everyone has had a chance to put their input in to tell you what they think it means, and you come to an agreement that this is what we're going to call this. Doesn't mean that some of those other definitions aren't important, or that they may still want to track those, but you're going to call them something else now, or that you're at least going to make it, you know, something different, so that you can say, okay, this is that same calculation, but I've tweaked it and I'm only looking at Tuesdays, or I'm only looking at the Northeast geographic region. So this is another one. So I talked about, you know, people deleting data, or maybe you haven't necessarily been collecting the data, and now you're trying to go back and find out, you know, I want to look at this in my history, but now my history, you know, what I thought I had enough of isn't enough. And what do I mean by that? So there are market size cycles, whether it's seasonality on an annual basis, maybe it's, you know, whether it's Christmas, it's the Super Bowl, it's the 4th of July, it's, you know, the, it could be anything that's important to your company. You know, maybe it's a new iPad release, right? Whatever those things are that happen, call them annually or frequently or on a consistent basis. If you don't have enough history to show the trends and the patterns of that, you know, you're using only a small amount of data then to either forecast the history or look back to what happened last time when this happened, you know, what happened, you know, 3 Christmases ago when it was on a Wednesday, or what happened when, you know, the Super Bowl was in Tampa. So all of these types of things start to kind of, you lose that data and that history to make, you know, to show trends or patterns. Unique events, I see this come up often as well. So, you know, particularly with weather, right? So weather has an impact to all of us. You know, I've been in the transportation for a while now, so obviously weather impacts transportation. And when we have unique events like tornadoes or thunderstorms, or, you know, maybe there's something specific in a certain area that has, you know, changed whatever's, you know, the weather is happening in that area. You have to think about how you maybe come back from that, or, you know, what happened last time this happened. And again, this is something that may only happen once every 2 or 3 years. And again, if you don't have that history to understand what happened last time that happened, whether it's exactly the same or not, you're not going to be able to understand maybe what's going to happen in the future, or what's going to happen this time that we have that huge weather event, or that huge, you know, snowfall, et cetera. You know, being up here in Green Bay, we're kind of used to that, but sometimes they get it down in Texas, and what happens then? So that's kind of the unique event. You know, there are other things as well that happen, you know, kind of discreetly like this, discounts or price increases. So if you make a change and you want to understand the impact, maybe you're looking at price elasticity, you know, having that history. Oh, we did that, you know, 3 years ago. What happened then when we increased pricing? And let's see if we can do some calculations from that. You know, making sure that you've kept that data. Facility closures, you know, that's not related to anything necessarily, but if you have a facility closure and you go back and you look at your data and you say, you know, why was there this big dip back in September of 2018, or even further back than that? And you say, I'm not sure what happened. And you try and find someone who can remember, right? You're trying to come up with, like, you know, someone's memory to mark what happened in that data. So that's, you know, that's difficult as well. Changes in regulation, a lot of regulations out there. So if you have a change in regulation, how does that impact it? And then, of course, just forecast in general. If you don't have enough history of your data, you know, you can't necessarily see a trend, right? So, you know, you can look and you see, hey, it's increasing the past 6 months. But if you go back further, you can see that you actually are recovering from a downfall, right? And, you know, think about COVID and what COVID has done to our data and our forecasts, and, you know, how we're looking at normalizing COVID. You know, that's going to be just crazy for all of us, I have a feeling. So then let's talk about data storage a little bit, because I know that one thing people say is, you know, well, so-and-so has this data on their computer and they're calculating it a different way and I can't access it. or, you know, maybe it's somewhere, but your business people can't access it, right? So they have to make a call in to someone in BI, IT, analytics, whatever you're calling it. And they're saying, I'd really like to know, you know, I'd like to see a trend of the data for the last, you know, 6 months to a year or whatever they're looking for. So where do you store your data, and think about the value of that? And we'll talk a little bit about security too. So where is it? Is it on someone's laptop? Are you worried that they're going to lose that laptop? Is it on a disk? I mean, now I'm really aging myself, but is it on a floppy disk somewhere, right? Or is it, you know, is it not necessarily someplace that everyone can access it, so everyone has the ability to pull from the same data source? You know, cloud versus on-prem. I know there's a whole lot of discussion here about which is better. I really think that, you know, this is kind of like, do you like the cloud? Have you set it up so that you have good access to the cloud, that you can run analytics on the cloud, you know, put your algorithms up there? You know, that's a great place to be able to spin up different, you know, size, you know, to kind of run different things. And then also it's a little bit cheaper to store things. But sometimes on-prem is better for certain companies, especially smaller companies, I imagine, right? To keep things on-prem, to have access to them, maybe to have more people be able to access them as well. You're also then not worried about bringing data back down from the cloud and the costs related to that. So it's kind of like a fixed cost versus variable. To me, it doesn't matter from a data perspective, because you can have good data on the cloud or on-prem. So this is just more of a subjective, which one do you like better? So we talked about, you know, the idea that maybe you can't keep all the data. And again, the analyst in me says that you can, but I understand, again, that there may be legal reasons, regulatory reasons, maybe even just company policy reasons that you're not going to keep all the data in all your history. Or maybe, you know, there are even restrictions on the amount of storage space you have. And so, you know, there's some things there where maybe you can't keep all the data. But maybe you can keep some summary data. And by summary data, I mean, what do we need to make the big decisions? Or what do we need to drive the business? Maybe I don't need, you know, every single widget I sold to every single customer at every single store for the last 5 years. But maybe I need, you know, some summary type statistics or data on by month, by day. And again, this is what's appropriate for your data. So, you know, these are just some ideas that I have as I'm thinking about my data. Do you keep something like on an hourly basis? You know, how many things, how many people clicked during this hour on my, you know, discount? Or how many, excuse me, how many people came into the ER on an hourly basis? And then maybe you say, I'm going to keep some summary, you know, demographic information about them. I won't keep every single person back 10 years, but I'll understand how many of them came from a certain area, or how many of my customers are female or male, you know, how many yellow widgets did I make? Not necessarily every one, but again, what makes sense for you? Is it hourly, daily, monthly, geography, line of business, product line, customer? You can think again about some demographic data that you keep. And this allows you to keep a longer history and a more curated data set than just kind of having, you know, a large data set that people will have to kind of, they may have to explicitly define the query every time they want to go and pull the data set. And now what you're setting up is something that's a little bit more accessible, something that's a little bit more of value to the business. And you've already taken the time to make those definitions, clean the data, etc. And I think that actually gets us kind of here to the idea of some other data sources or some other things about data. You know, there's third-party data. And you know that this is an asset because you've probably paid for it. So you can actually put the exact value of what this data is If it's open source data, you've taken the time to download it. You've taken the time to understand it. You've taken the time to use it in your algorithms or in your models. So you know the value of this third-party data that you've got. Take a few minutes just to talk about data governance. I touched on this some. You know, I am a proponent of data governance, but I also understand that smaller companies may not be able to have an entire entire group set for data governance. So you may be able to find this, and have people kind of fill this role within other areas of the company. But what you're really looking for is maintaining reliable, high quality, defined data. It's a controlled process of maintaining data. It is about working with your business so that you're collecting the data that they need, that they understand what that data is. You invest in maintaining the other assets you have. You change the oil on your vehicles. You do maintenance in a building. Why would you not invest in maintaining your data, making sure you know where it is, where it comes from, what it's capturing, who has access to it, what's the security of it, right? Can everybody have access to it, or is it, personally identifiable information that we need to be careful of? I'm sure you see a lot of that in the health area, as well as with customer data. So you'll see that a lot, as you're talking about data governance. But data stewards are really important in this, and those are people from the business and the technology world that are working together to make sure that, I have this field and I'm trying to capture, social security numbers maybe. So I want to make sure that everything that gets put in there looks like a social security number. And I want to make sure there aren't duplicates. And I want to make sure that, they're accurate, and all that type of thing is what you'll see from a data governance. So citizen data scientists and power users are two things. So citizen data science and power users to me are very similar. These are people outside of maybe the IT or the analytics world that have kind of that ability though to think very logically and pull data and do some kind of, I won't call it basic, but the idea of like what they need and what they need for their department to understand the data. So the thing about them is they're both useful, but I think you have to be careful. If you just have power users or citizen data scientists that can go in and pull any data they want and make any, any transformations they want, make any calculations they want, you start to just go back to exactly where you were before, right? You had a vacuum, somebody's trying to fill it, and these are the people that are trying to fill it. They have the knowledge of what they're looking for, but they may not have the best knowledge of the data itself. So this is kind of where I think what needs to happen is that you actually provide them with the data that, the summary data or the very specific data that they're looking for so that they can pull what they need for their specific purpose, but not necessarily try to redefine something that you've already been very specific about and how it's defined. I don't think that everything needs to live within the analytics world. I mean, in a perfect world, maybe, but I think we do need to give the power to others. And one of those ways is in talking about predefined reports and queries. So, again, this is a way for you to give a larger group of people the data and the information that they need, but in a very specific way. You've defined what they need. You've defined the data. You've defined the calculations. They now know exactly what they're getting. And when we created the Center of Excellence, we actually had those definitions written. We talked about the security of the data. We talked about who to contact if they had questions, who built it, how often it's updated. All of these things are things that you need to think about. And lastly, there's this kind of idea of, is it a dashboard versus fixed reports, whether you're using Tableau, SAS visualization, Power BI. I think dashboards are a great thing because not only are you now giving the business the data they need, but they're able to kind of click into it and dive in and also kind of slice and dice it so they can, be very specific. If I have, 13 states under my region, but I want to look at a specific one, instead of having 13 different reports, I can now get a dashboard and kind of click around until I find what I need and what I'm looking for. So I think that's another way that you can provide the data. But again, you have to have, you first kind of have to set it up so that it's that high quality data that you're looking for. So I'm up against my time and I kind of spoke fast. So I hope you guys got some things out of that. But I really do believe in the value of data.